G'day runners, welcome to Running Alive. I'm Jason Montfort. In this video I'm going to take you through 3 main tips to improve your interval training. Three things that we want to look at to improve your interval training. Now, it pretty much doesn't matter what your goal is or what type of intervals you're doing, these tips will help. So tip number 1, form matters. Your running technique is important. There are more than one ways to get to the times that you're aiming for. You can grunt through the training, force the speed, go through pushing really hard, and it just feels like a struggle to get there. Or you can run tall, get that spring in your stride, achieve those same times with good, clean running form. Now, intervals, we're definitely not always going to feel great, and some of them we just have to grind through them. But if you're grinding all the time, it'll be worth having a look at your form. Intervals are the perfect opportunity to focus in for a short period on getting it right. You only have a few minutes and then you have a break in which you can focus strongly on your form. Use it. The speed and the pace is the byproduct of what you do, of how you run, of the effort you put in, and the way you use that effort. Now, point number 2, pacing. Pacing is important. Secondary to keeping your form in check, your next bit is to get your pacing right. So we can flash and crash straight away, go out really hard and then just struggle. There may be a few times when you aim to do this, to go out way too hard, see where it gets you, see if you can sustain it, find those boundaries. There are times for it, but it's not every session. Learn what effort actually feels like. It's very different at the start, the first few hundred meters of an interval versus getting through your 8th lot of 3-minute repeats or your 8 times 1,000 meters. At the end of an interval session, it should feel harder to maintain the pace that you had at the start. Take this into account, learn what it does, and pace yourself. So I've got an example. So let's get into the training. So I've been using Final Surge to track my training, and I'll use my latest training session as an example of this one. This 4x4 minutes is what I'm showing now is actually 4 by 1,000 meters. We'll look at the first interval, and I took an average pace of 3:52. Second, 3:55, a bit slower, but back on 3:52. For the final 4th repeat, average 3:47 with a mild increase in effort. If we look at the heart rate profiles for this, the curve builds up and the heart rate gradually climbs or even hits an almost steady state at the end. That's what we want to look for. So we'll get past the warm up, a few strides, then interval 1, 2, 3 and 4. You'll see that the effort had to increase at least slightly for each interval to maintain the speed, but I didn't crash and burn at this one. There are times when you want to vary this, but this should be the gold standard for the majority of your work. Let's compare this to the 4x4 minutes that I did a bit over a week earlier. It wasn't so successful. Here we'll see the 4 intervals, 4 minutes. First 3 looked great, 4th one clearly couldn't hold it. Let's have a look at the paces of each one. Average 3:59 for the first, 3:58, 3:58 again, seemed well paced, but the effort to maintain that was no good and I crashed and burned on the last. Now we're definitely going to have times when this happens. This is the point of training. We need to find our limits. And sometimes we find our limits by going past them at the time. If this is what you're doing every interval session, you need to take a good rethink. What's going to happen on race day if you can't judge your effort and your pacing? And for tip number 3 is don't stress the recovery. For most interval sessions, except for the really short intervals, it doesn't matter. So once you start doing intervals of 2 minutes or longer, so 2 minutes, 3, 4, 5, 8 minutes, 10. Don't stress too much about the recovery. I tend to use 2 minutes as my standard. Beyond 2 minutes, you don't see much more recovery. Yes, it might feel a bit easier. There's the mental side of it. But there isn't much difference between 2 minutes and out to 30 minutes in recovery in what gets replenished. If you want full recovery from an interval, you're looking at 40 to 45 minutes for the most part, and even then it's not quite the same. But if what you're using, whether you're doing intervals on the hill and the jog back down is what it takes, then so be it. It doesn't matter if it's 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5. Don't stress too much about the recovery. And what should you do in the recovery? There is evidence that the recovery is enhanced between the intervals, and you can get more out of each interval with a bit of movement. So whether you're walking, jogging, or running at an easy pace, that's what you want to achieve. If you just stand and wait, so a passive recovery, it has been shown that you do accumulate a bit more blood lactate. Don't stress the recovery.